The code will be good. We will go for version 4. If the code will be some errors are there, we will give update for 3 version, right? 3.1 right
Correct.
version.
3.1, 3.2, and all these things. Correct.
If the code will be good, that will be version will be 4, right?
Uh, Not really. Again, it just depends upon the life cycle. For example, you are using, let's say, Android 10. Okay, let's say you're using Android 10.0, something like that. Android 11 will come next year. Until that point, you will still get updates like Android 1, Android 2, I mean, Android 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and all these things. So you can have minor upgrades. You can have minor upgrade. You can go for a major upgrade later and all these things. Just depends upon what your software development lifecycle really tells. In my case, let's say the software development lifecycle is for every 1 year. Then every 1 year, I'll release a new version, like version 4, version 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth. And between that, I'll be upgrading my versions like 3.1, 3.2, 3, 4, and all these things. If I have an issue, or if I do not even have an issue, if I want to enhance that particular application version, then I'll do the same thing out here as such. Can we have two slots working at once? Yes, definitely. Two slots can work at once. You can have two multiple slots out here, just depending upon how many slots your plan can support. In my case, my plan can support 5 slots. So I can say this is testing one. Add the slot out here. So I can have a different slot with a different URL, and I can use that particular slot to target out, and I can go ahead and do a swap, and I can now have a freedom to go ahead and let's just select what is my source, what is my destination, and all these things out here. This is how I can go ahead and swap my slots and adjust my slots and all these things out here. So you can have multiple slots. Shouldn't be an issue running at once. Yes, you can run multiple slots at once. It just depends upon what is our requirement out here. How many slots that we need just depends upon what is our requirement out here. If you have a very big team, one slot might not be sufficient. You might need multiple slots to test it out and all that stuff. And in this case, you have testing one, testing and all these. If you do a swap, then in the source, you can select what is your slot. You can say, is it testing one, is it test one, and all these things out. And then you can swap it out with production. Target is also always, let's say, the same thing out here, which is production. So the source can change, source can be different slots. Target should normally be the production out here as such. Yes, anyone, any questions, any
Sir,
more questions?
one
Mhm.
resource group is enough for testing production deployment. Is one resource group is enough in real time scenario?
For in real time scenario, no, not really. In this case, I'm just using, let's say, one particular resource group to test everything out here, just to make sure let's say things in a very simpler way. But in a real time environment, you'll have multiple resource groups. One for development, one for QA, one for staging, one for let's say production and all these things out. So you would try to isolate multiple resource groups depending upon what kind of a life cycle that you're working with. Is it development? Is it testing? Is it, let's say, staging? Is it production and all these things out? Which we will address when we move into DevOps practice. Much more depth. We'll be let's say addressing all these things in the DevOps practice as such. Okay. While doing a swap, can I change the web app name or logo? When you say while doing a swap, can I change the web app name or logo? I'm not too sure what you're trying to do out here, but if you can, let's just elaborate on this a little bit. I can help explain that. So if all slots are accessible by public, what's the difference about production slot? Production slot is production. This is something that you expose to a user. Yes, these are all accessible publicly, but I'm not going to give you this name out here. I'm never going to share this particular, let's say, name out here with you. I can have anything in the background, running anything in the background, but what you share is production. What you don't is for your internal testing. That is the biggest difference between production and testing. Production is something that your users are working out here. This is a real time environment for you. All these are testing environments that are running in the background. This is something that you give it to your developer. This is something that you never expose to a end user out here as such. Again, this will not be the URL that I'll actually give it to you. This is just a URL that Azure is giving to me, like .azurewebsites.net. I will later go ahead and map this URL to, let's say, a different website, like let's say www.google.com or facebook.com, and give it to you in that way. So that's what is the biggest difference that makes, or that's what is the biggest difference between testing and production out there. Okay, while doing a swap, can I change the web app name or logo? I'm not too sure on what do you really want to change there, but if you can elaborate on this a little, I'll definitely help you explain the same thing out there as such. Version, okay. Version, okay. Version changing, version 2 on version 3. I want new names in the logo. If you want new names in the logo, you need a new code, my friend. You will need a new code out here. This is all controlled by the code. This is something that I'm not controlling. If you want a new logo, please adjust your code, redeploy your code onto a slot, and then swap this out. So this is something that I am, as a DevOps engineer, not controlling. This welcome and all these things that you see is controlled by the code that you're working on. This is where it's coming from. It's like, the .NET and all that stuff, display name and all these things out. So this is where it's really coming on from. I am not really adjusting all these things out. Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any more questions here?
Sir, can we change the name to IP address? URL
Uh,
name to.
can you change the URL name to IP address? You can do that. Good question. Can I change the name to the IP address? Let's see that. For which you will need the IP of this particular application. You need some kind of an IP address of this particular application. So what I'll do is there are multiple tools that are available online. If you want to understand what is the IP, the multiple tools that are available online, or you can use your PowerShell script, a very simple PowerShell script out here called resolve-DNS name. I'll just give a simple script telling resolve-DNS name hyphen name, and if I enter this out, this is the IP address that I have, which is 20.119.136.65 or 196.5 136.5 out here. Same IP address is something that you can see under something called as custom domains. You just type in custom domains out here. Same IP address is something that you can see out here, which is 20.119.136.5. Now, if I hit this IP directly, now this is the IP address that is controlled by Microsoft right now, saying this particular site is not found. You're not allowed to go ahead and directly, let's say, hit this particular IP address because this is pass in nature. This is now handled completely by Microsoft. So you can only call your application by using a URL. You cannot hit the IP directly out here. You'll need to call the URL of this particular application out here.
In IAS, we can do that.
In IaaS, we can do that. We also did that in IaaS because IaaS is something that you are controlling. The IP networking and all is something that you are controlling. So yes, in infrastructure as a service, you can do that. But in PaaS, you cannot really do that out here.
We can request to Microsoft, sir,
No, you cannot.
for suppose
But
router have one for router login
mhm,
one have IP address is there like that.
mhm. No, you cannot
We
do
can
that. You
request
cannot
to
really use the. No, no, you cannot use the IP. But my question is that why do you want to use the IP? You have the fully qualified domain name. So just trying to understand what is the requirement of using the IP out here instead of using the domain name out here.
for secure purpose. The domain name will be once we say that the domain name will be also known to the persons. We can use that will be secure.
Shouldn't be. Firstly, how will the domain name be known to the person that is, let's say, operating the background? Like meaning when you say an actual user, how will the user actually know this one? How will the actual
Okay.
user know this one? Or if you are, let's say, worried about that, telling that you know what the user should not be able to access this out, you can implement some kind of a networking out here, which will also look at. You can lock your website only to your internal users and all these things out here.
Like VPN, we add VPN.
Not region. You can use something like access restrictions or something like that, which will go into, and you can only make this site available for your internal developers and internal testers and all these things out, and this can be a public website.
Can
We
we
can
add
do that.
for can we add SAS token for this website, sir?
Can you add SaaS token for this website? When you say SaaS token, SaaS token is something that is applied to a storage account that cannot be applied to a app service out here. You do not have a concept called SaaS token out here.
Okay.
Yes, any more questions here? Anyone? Any questions still here?
Hello. Hi, Kiran.
Anyone? Anything? Good, please.
Yeah, actually, for testing, there are some settings are there, and for production, there are some settings are there. Both are
Mm-hmm.
pointing to different settings. Do we need to take care any about like related to any additional settings?
No, not
Like
really. When you
for
say
testing,
settings,
there may be
okay,
sorry. Actually, testing there may be pointing to test service or mock service or test DB for testing,
correct. Mhm.
and production there may be a pointing to live.
Correct.
So both are different settings. Do we need to take care about as a DevOps? Is there any additional settings? Our
No,
developer
not
is
really.
taking care about that.
No, not really. All the settings right now are inside my code. So I, as a DevOps engineer, in this, let's say example, I'm not taking care of any settings out here. But we'll also talk about what are the settings and all these things when we go ahead and let's say work with SQL databases and all these things out here.
Okay, actually, for swapping the code, internal code, maybe it is pointing to different settings.
Could be not a problem, but you can just
Okay,
go ahead swap this. In this particular example, no, I am not let's say taking care of any settings out here. When you do a swap, when you go into that particular slots and do a swap, the swap also takes care of your settings out here. So if you look at this, if I just swap this out, it's also telling what are the configuration changes. If I change it from let's say one slot to the other, it's also telling what is the configuration change that it needs to take care of. So I, as DevOps engineer, do not need to let's say do that. You can just do a swap, and the swap really takes care of all these things out here as such. Yes, any more questions? Okay, anyone who did not follow this concept, anyone who feels that this is confusing and need a recap, anyone who did not follow this.
So database SQL also will do the DevOps engineer.
From an infrastructure perspective, yes. As a DevOps engineer, you should go ahead and let's say create the database out here.
Okay, for deploying purpose and for testing
Yes,
purpose, we created.
correct.
Okay.
Okay, when you say me, what exactly is me here? Do you mean that you have a doubt here? And if you have a doubt, which concept or which section you are confused about? If you can elaborate on that, only then I'll be able to, let's say, explain pretty much, let's say, to that particular topic as such.
Hi, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Sir, today's section, I have free trial. How to practice this one, sir?
Even in free trial, you can, once you create an F1 plan in, let's say, a region like North Central US or something like that, you can pretty much go
Okay.
ahead and do a scale up and scale yourself up to, let's say, something like S1 or something like that. That should be sufficient. You can go ahead and still do this. Even in a free trial, you can go ahead and do this out. Yes, any more questions here?
Sir, in this scenario, how to download the DLL files, sir, for
In
production
this
level?
scenario, okay, in this scenario, how to download the DLL files? So yes, a good question is that I have my code on the cloud right now. Everything is now running on the cloud. For some reason, I want to go ahead and download that particular DLL file because I want all that particular DLLs and all that stuff, meaning all the binary files and etc. I want to, for some reason, I want to just go ahead and download this out. Again, when I say the code is deployed here, where exactly is the code right now? Where did we deploy the code to?
In Artifacts, we will have a code, right?
Sorry, in what files? I'm sorry, can you please come again?
In Artifacts, we will have a code. We deploy that in production.
Artifacts. So where are the artifacts?
in DevOps portal.
No, I'm not talking about DevOps at all. Forget about DevOps. There is no DevOps right
Okay.
now. You deploy the
Okay.
code. You want to download the
Yeah.
code right now. My question is that if I deploy the code, where will the code actually stay? Where will the code actually reside?
In resource group, right?
Okay, where is the code here in resource group? Can you please show me?
I think we have to create one container for create one storage
Okay.
account in resource
Okay,
group.
but I did not create a storage account right now. I don't really need a storage account right now. Why
Okay.
do I really
Production
need a
area.
storage account? I'm sorry.
Production area.
Production area. When you say production area, what exactly is production area here?
The code is available in production area.
In production area,
Yes,
we have only we will monitor that code, right?
correct. But can you tell me that when you say the production area, where exactly should I go? Let's understand this a little technically out here. Where exactly should I go and get my code? The requirement here is that, you know what, I have the code. I want to download the code right now. So where will I download the code from? Or where do you think will the code be when you say that I deployed the code? Okay, let's come back. Where did I deploy the code to? Or how did I deploy my code? Slot. So where is the code right now? In the
Okay.
app service. In the app service, where exactly is the code? Yes, it's a web app. But in which folder is the code is there sitting in? www root. Inside that, I have all my code. Meaning when I did the deployment, all the code went into this particular, let's say, www root. And how can I access this www root? WinACP, using WinACP, or if you don't want to use WinACP, if you directly want to use the Azure portal, go into something called advanced tools. There is something called advanced tools out here. If you click on this one, it's telling advanced tools and all these things out. Just say go. This will take you into the backend of an app service, meaning into the C drive or the D drive of the virtual machine that is running in the background. So you have a VM in the background, nothing but app service is nothing but a VM. And this VM has multiple folders. And one of the folders is called www root. And if I click on this, now I am in the background of this particular app service. And these are called kudu services, or this is also called as a kudu console. I'm here in the background, and in the background, I can click on this one called debug console. There is something called CMD or PowerShell. You can select any one, not a problem. And once I'm in here, I have something called diagnostic console. This is the diagnostic console basically that I'm into right now. And this has a limited access. And in here, there is a folder called site, inside which I have a folder called what? Root. Inside this, I have all my DLLs out here. So if you want to download this out, just click on the download button. This will give you the entire root file in a format of a zip. You can extract this zip onto your local and understand what are all the DLLs that are there in place out here. So I went into advanced section, opened up the kudu services out here. Once I'm inside the kudu services, I went inside the root folder. I went inside the site and then inside the root. And inside the root, I have all the DLLs that I published using my Visual Studio out here. So you don't need a container, you don't need a production area. This is the area basically that has all your code. And if you want to take a look at the backend from the advanced tools, you can go inside the backend of this particular code out here. Yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any questions still here? Warming up of the application. Good question. Is that in Microsoft document? I heard something about warming up of an application. Let's see that. There is something called warm up. Where is that? Specify this one. There is warm up. Yes. Doing a swap. There is something called warm up out here. Let's see. specify custom warm up and all these things out. Warm up is nothing but, see, when your code gets deployed, the code needs some time to, let's say, work with that particular infrastructure, needs some time to, let's say, work in a fully fledged manner. This time that the code takes is called as a warm up time. So what we do is that we first deploy the code into a slot, allow it some time to run, and specify what is the warm up time in this particular, let's say, app settings out here. Inside your code, you specify what is the warm up so that it can auto swap. It can auto swap itself after a specified period of time. This time for which we allowed the code is called as a warm up time. Yes, any more questions? Anyone, any more questions out here?
How to give, sir, how to give will code to the client to DLL
How
file
to,
like
why do you want to give the code to the client? The client has given the responsibility to you to develop the code. I am not giving the code to the client. I am giving an application to the client in the form of a URL. I am not giving that particular DLLs to anyone. Why should I even give this DLL to the client out here?
okay,
Right, getting my point? The client has given
yeah, getting.
you the responsibility as your organization to go ahead and develop this out. It makes no point in me going ahead and giving the DLL to the client out here. Again, if you want to
Okay,
share
the
that
client,
particular thing, go ahead, please.
then client will be cancel our agreement. Then the client will be go for another organization.
That's what I'm telling
They
you.
ask DLL
Is that
file.
what does your agreement really specify in that case then? Does the agreement tell that the client needs DLLs? If yes, then do a build and produce that DLL in the location where the client wants it. If the client wants an application, why are you giving me a DLL? It's not that you are giving an application the client will cancel the agreement. No. It just depends upon what your agreement really talks about. What exactly that particular agreement actually talks about out there.
Sir, it will, sir, I can ask one thing. If the client has
Good, please.
DLL file, can,
Mhm.
if the client has DLL file, the client
Okay.
cancel my agreement and they will start the app organization and then deploy that organization. It's possible.
If the client has the DLL files and they cancel the agreement, and if they, again, uh, it's a little, let's say, towards the organization structure out there. Uh, if someone has the DLL files, if they want to deploy it, yes, they can deploy it. To answer it in a very simple or a straightforward manner, without going into the technicality of it, if you have a DLL file, yes, you can simply go ahead, take the DLL file, put it in your app service, and it will run. There is no issue with that.
Okay. If the client has no update version,
Mhm.
I don't need the update version. The client will be deploy that.
It just depends, again, it just depends upon what is the contract and how you have the contract with that and all that stuff. But I'm not really going into that area out here, wherein I'm not addressing the technicality of the agreement and all these things, but because that will become a little bit of, let's say, into administration and all that stuff. Not really want to address that. I want to, let's say, address this portion of the syllabus of that we have, like, the infrastructure side of it, so that we understand how things work in the background. And if you have that specific question, I would say, just send out an email to me. What is the specific question, so that I can take it on the email as such out there. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Yes, so your assignment here is to understand firstly about slots. Again, if I'm giving an assignment, I expect you all to go ahead and do a read about that particular assignment, guys, because without that, if you come to the class, it'll all be Greek and Latin. It'll everything be Greek and Latin right now, because from today we are doing app services, then there are multiple services out there, and we go into DevOps. There are a lot of things that will actually come to you. So if you are not following, or if you're not going back and redoing this class, it'll become very difficult for you. So please understand what a deployment slot is. Try to stay in touch with how the class is going. Because if today's class is not completed today, it'll become very difficult for you to follow the tomorrow session out there. It'll become all Greek and Latin out there for you. So please do this on a regular basis. Because one thing that I want to tell you is that classes are sufficient to an extent. After that, you'll also have to read the documentation of it, because the documentation keeps updating on a very daily basis. If let's say in the future you get an error while you're working, you cannot look at the class video, because that by that time class video would have been, let's say, very old. You'll have to come down to the documentation, and the reason me giving the documentation out here is for you to understand how to read it, which section to read it, and understand what the documentation really tells you, and then implement the same thing on your Azure portal. This is what I want you to try and implement out here. All right, any more questions, guys, that I can take before I close? Okay, thank you guys, and have a good weekend ahead, and we'll meet on Monday. Thank you.